Yo, welcome back to From Somewhere podcast. This is a new segment of the show called Thoughts from Somewhere, where each week the whole team will be here to catch up and dive deep or not so deep into a variety of topics. Each month, Thoughts from Somewhere podcast will focus on one core theme to discuss, explore, and hopefully provide you with a little bit of insight. This month's theme is film history.
Well, and film and just the making of films and video.
Making of films. There you go. That's why I have two other guys on this. You know, what's going on, boys?
Nothing much, man. Our guest this month is Eva, correct?
Eva Glasbeek. It's kind of like.
What's a little info background on that, Will?
Yeah, she's a Dutch filmmaker. She lives in Amsterdam. She makes a lot of commercial content, online content. She's got a really great style in terms of her shooting, and her edits are all so sick. She travels to like Italy and France and shoots stuff for fashion brands. She recently came out with a short film called Backlash. That's just kind of about growing up, like being us, being a 27-something-year-old in this crazy social media time. And so she's releasing that, and she also made a short documentary with her mom about the waste that is produced when you have a cancer treatment. So she's got a lot of really cool stories and ideas, and she's really passionate about what she does. So I think she's going to be a great person to talk to on the podcast.
That's dope. I'm excited to talk to her.
Yeah.
Exciting. I'd also love to dive in a little bit more with her on the history of film, right? Like how film started.
Yeah.
You know how things are changing, whether it's how we talked about marketing, right? Like how we transitioned into a new style of marketing, and every 10 years we get a new type of marketing.
Yeah.
And we've experienced the same thing with film, right?
Yeah, I think it's definitely partially true. It's crazy. I don't know. The history of film is pretty wild. It actually took about 100 years from the first photographic cameras until they started making silent films in the 1920s, early 1900s. So it's interesting because it started with a couple of guys experimenting with photos and then putting them together to create images that we can see with our eyes, to repeat pictures and stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's come a long way, but some of the basic technologies are still used today.
So question for you guys. Do you guys know what the first... Actually, let me back up real quick. Have you guys ever thought about why the word movie exists? I thought about this while I was in the bathroom today, to be honest.
The word movie?
The word movie, why is it called a movie and not a film?
Because the pictures go movie.
They
move.
Right? And the first film, I found this out, was actually pictures back to back of a horse moving.
Yeah, they were trying to I can't remember what it was. I think it was some experiment or some thing. They were trying to basically see whether or not a horse's hooves all lift from the ground in the middle of its stride. And the way they were trying to do that was by taking a bunch of cameras, taking a bunch of pictures as the horse rode along the horse race track, which is actually, they went to one in Sacramento.
Oh, wow.
To do it, yeah. And sure enough, all four hooves of a horse lift up when it's in stride. And so it's funny because I feel like the first films really were kind of testing theories or trying to figure something out, but then they really kind of started just doing movies of situations, silent films, one-shot films. So maybe it wasn't an actual narrative we know, a beginning, story, and end, but it was maybe a video of people watching a train pass by. Ooh, like back then that was a big deal. And yeah.
Real quick, because a lot of our audience aren't really, film knowledgeable, and you do film, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm in it.
Our direct, in a sense.
Huh?
What does a one-shot film mean?
So a one-shot film is a film. So the most recent example that I can think of is 1917, which is a World War I film about a officer. I think it was a British officer. I think who's going in to save his brother behind enemy lines. And the idea of a one-shot film is that it's one shot. The shot there's no cuts that you can see for the naked eye. So it basically follows a person through a whole event without switching characters, focus on character, or anything like that. It's literally one shot. So it can be a 20-minute film or an hour and a half film with literally, like, if you watch it, it's like you're following someone or an event.
Now I have a question. I have a question about, I guess this could be the history of film from back then till present day now. Let's say back then, your highest budget film, right? Whatever that was, I'm sure we could get some research on that and figure that out.
Yeah.
But your highest budget film back then, is it still relative to your highest budget film now, or does now just blow it out of the water? I'm talking about time difference here.
I mean, I'm not really sure in terms of costs, but I do know. Oh, what were you going to say, Dominic?
I was going to say, well, you can think about it. Okay, so when back then, let's say 1900s, first of all, there was no sound. Second of all, there was no color. Third of all, there was no CGI. Fourth of all, the cost of a camera is...
You'd be surprised, bro. They actually, back then, they did in-camera... Well, not CGI, because it's computer generated, but they did their own forms of special effects with projectors, mirrors.
And that's why I'm asking, because now CGI, you have all this stuff, you have programs and AI and all this other shit, computers and tech that's doing it for you. But back then, you had to have manpower. That's hiring people.
Yeah.
That's a huge budget. Like, your budget was a lot more extensive, I guess you could say, back then than now. I don't know. I'm asking. I don't know.
Think about, though. Okay, manpower. You want to talk about manpower? Back in the 1900s, the director was pretty much behind the scenes, right? Like, completely behind the scenes, like in a room putting these pictures together.
Yeah.
Right? Nowadays, you have the director, you have the screenwriter, you have the producer, you have the sound guy, you have the costume guy, you have this guy.
Didn't you have all that?
They still had all that. So to answer your question, I think back then, I would actually imagine that back then it cost more if you think about like inflation.
Relative.
Right.
I'm not talking about.
I don't think so, guys.
I
don't think so.
Yeah, the thing is that back then the big thing was technology, right? Like, they didn't have like we have now. Like, we have filmmaking is somewhat, I wouldn't say streamlined, but all of technology is like all fully developed. There's always new things coming out. Like, they have uniform sets of stands and a way of doing things. Back then, they were experimenting with it, so they were starting it out. So maybe it wasn't so much in terms of like the early 1900 ones, like I think there's The Great Train Robbery is one of the first narrative films that came out in the U.S. I wouldn't imagine that a 15-minute film can compare to a 2-hour mega film made by Marvel Studios, right?
Okay, let's say 1960s.
So like the 1960s, though, I was about to say, my next point was in the 1960s, you had these, I can't remember what the exact term was, but they were called the Hollywood epics. And these were movies that were directed by some of the greats, Alfred Hitchcock, C.C. DeMille. DeMille was in the 20s, but you have the 60s was kind of like the golden age of movies, where you had actually a lot of the movies were like 3 hours long, and they were all about like Roman tales and different like heroics. They were like heroic stories, like Hercules and like what was the other one? Oh man, I can't remember the name of it. But these films were so large and so long, and they took hundreds and hundreds of people to make. So I mean, back in the 60s, those budgets were massive, and those were comparable to the ones now.
Yeah,
Those were
that's what I
comparable
was
to-
asking, because it's just like, I mean, I'm interested to know, because it's like, yeah, you know, a lot of these, like I actually just saw something on Instagram the other day, and it was basically, it was the camera guys that get those when you're running into a car, or these car chases that are going on, all this like crazy shit, right? Like they're in the whip behind them, getting as close, you know what I mean, as they possibly can to getting that shot. But for the shots that they can get, but those big explosions, the Transformers throwing fucking, you know, ripping off a building. I just watched Godzilla versus King Kong the other day, and like they're just ripping off these buildings and destroying cities and stuff. That doesn't take many people.
It does. It actually really does.
Really?
Does. Oh yeah.
You got
So I'm talking about knocking the buildings down and all that. That's all fake, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but just because it's fake doesn't mean it doesn't take 200 people to make that scene work.
How?
Because
that's where I'm confused. Because it seems like when you're talking about CGI and all that, I mean, how many cats do you really need
it's a lot. It's actually surprisingly. It's surprisingly.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know. There's.
I would think it'd take a few people. That's how little knowledge I know about.
Yeah, but see, imagine so there's a few things, like when you are filming like a movie like that where you got like a robot tearing off a thing. All of those shapes and everything you see starts off with basic lines and dots, bro. And so then you have people that make kind of like the wireframe figure of the robot, maybe in the building, like falling apart in pieces. And then you have another team that comes in and then starts adding layers to give it texture, right? And then there's painters that paint the background. There's people that I think it's called rotoscoping, where you take so let's say you've made an object in the editing software and you need to make it move and like spin and like explode into different pieces. There's like people that have to go frame by frame to make sure the mask, like all these different layers like flow together evenly, basically. And it really is, it takes a lot of people. A lot of people and a lot of computer power and a lot of money. VFX is not cheap. And so that's the reason why now I feel like a lot of expense goes towards VFX and that sort of thing. It's basically computer engineers making these, and it's a lot of work.
Question for you guys, as we're coming to the end of this podcast real quick. Now that we talked about the past, what do you guys think about the future? I mean, like you said, it's all computer programming that's going into most of these films now, right? CGI, effects, all this stuff. What about the future? What do you guys expect to happen? Because, I mean, we can't just say we're one and done and that's it for movies. Like, we can't keep growing. Now everything grows, right? There's going to be a new level of film that we're going to experience. Like,
yeah. Do you want to go first, Iman?
I mean, all I was going to say is like, I feel like this could be a little off topic, but I mean, I don't get how these actors are going to keep the emotion and like the great acting that we see on these films they're literally talking to a green screen 90% of the time. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, yo, what the fuck? Like, these guys, I mean, you either have to be super talented because I feel like there isn't a lot of human to human.
Well, it's not live.
Bigger films I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know, blockbusters. Like, you're like, what the fuck? Like, how is this actor doing this? Like, I know that they're not, you know what I mean? Like, having to interact with anyone per se. They're interacting with the CGI or the VFX, like you guys are talking about. So it's like,
yeah.
But, I mean, I don't know where the future of film is going, because it might go actorless. Like, I don't know.
I don't think it. No, you know, I think what I learned from our podcast with Nick the other day was that when we were talking about radio and whether or not radio is dead, Radio still reaches 90% of people in the US, because guess what? Everyone goes into their car, and at some point, everybody forgets their phone or forgets to charge their phone. So guess what? They flip the radio. 90% of people still watch the radio, but the radio's been around since the 1920s or whatever, 30s, I think it is. So whereas I think it's similar to where films and movies, like watching a television, I feel like is similar in a way to listening to the radio. I don't think that we're going to go too far away from our classic movie viewing experience, because everyone's got a TV. TVs are now relatively cheap for a nice one. And if you want to talk about the future of it, I mean, yeah, I think maybe 3D space, like putting on VR goggles and like being the POV of the actor might be something that we see in the future. But I think in terms of adaptability, I don't think many people would really want to do that, nor at the time invest. I don't know how the prosumer like technology is in terms of making that a reality for most people in the US. I think we're still going to stick to our tablets and desktops and TVs to watch our movies.
Yeah. What I'm picturing right now is I just took ideas from both of you just now. Not the actorless part, but the other part of how do they interact with the human. I think we'll see more about like video games turning into movies. Like we put on goggles and, we augmented reality and can move ourselves around the space and actually hear a story, because that's what film is, right? It's a narrative. It's a story that we watch, we obtain, we get emotions from, we laugh, we cry, we freak out, whatever it may be. That's what the art of film is, right? But I feel like sooner or later we'll be able to move ourselves around a universe that exists and actually be experiencing our own movie. That makes sense.
So you're basically saying like when you start a video game and you have to be that guy the whole time, like you just decide to be that guy instead and like go and do your own fucking thing. I'd be nuts.
I don't know, man. That seems kind of like dystopian to me, bro.
I just wouldn't put anything past it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see why it couldn't happen, because it's like a lot of the things that we see now, we're like, yeah, we're not going to see that in our generation, but well, we are,
I don't think people are really going to want to immerse themselves that much into.
You'd be surprised, bro.
I mean, yeah.
Surprised about people that would want to go and be actors and audition and things, and maybe they have, but they didn't make the cut, so they're gonna go home and they're gonna get put on that VR set, like Dom was saying, and go and be, Leonardo DiCaprio on Titanic. Like,
by the way, Titanic, the first $1 billion movie.
See?
In the U.S. revenue. So.
Yeah, I'd love to keep this conversation going. But as we all know, these are short segments, so we'll keep it nice and short.
We'll keep it going next week.
Yeah, let's dive into this next week, guys.
All right.
Yeah, sounds good.
Peace.
Later, guys.